Memorial Day weekend, we remember those who have given their life that we might be free. Freedom is not free. It costs. It cost a great price. Let's remember them in prayer this moment. Father, we thank you. Thank you for those who are willing to give it all, that we might live in freedom. This Memorial Day weekend, we remember those who have given their life in line of service. And Father, it gives us an example as Christians. An example that we too may be called upon to give our lives for the sake of Jesus Christ. Father, give us the strength to be willing to die for Jesus. Because if we're not willing to die for him, we'll never live for him. And Father, make us bold, even if they come and arrest us for our faith, that we would stand and not bemoan ourselves as victims, but stand rejoicing that we're counted worthy to suffer for the sake of Christ. Make us strong. And as we remember this weekend those who have fallen, may we rejoice as well in our commitment to the one who is risen. For it's in the name of Jesus we pray. Amen. Welcome to our service. We're going to do things a little bit different this morning. We're actually going to start off with the sermon. I know you can't do that. But we're going to do it anyway, just to do something a little bit different, to add variety and spice to the things that we do. We're in the middle of a series entitled Common Sense Parenting. And we're specifically looking at the issue of discipline without discouragement. If you remember, last week we started part 1, and we got halfway through the message and I quit. And you never want to just get half a message. You want the whole thing. And so this week I'm going to finish up the latter part of the message. The message is based around the principles that come out of Hebrews chapter 12, verses 5 through 11. Let's read this together, and in respect for God's word, let's stand. Hebrews 12, 5 through 11, together. And you have forgotten the exhortation which speaks to you as to sons. My son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord, nor be discouraged when you are rebuked by him. For whom the Lord loves, he chastens, and scourges every son whom he receives. If you endure chastening, God deals with you as with sons. For what son is there whom a father does not chasten? But if you are without chastening, of which all have become partakers, then you are illegitimate and not sons. Furthermore, we have had human fathers who corrected us, and we paid them respect. Shall we not much more readily be in subjection to the Father of spirits and live? For they indeed for a few days chastened us as seemed best to them, but he for our profit, that we may be partakers of his holiness. Now no chastening seems to be joyful for the present, but painful. Nevertheless, afterward it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. The Lord add his blessing to the reading of his word. You may be seated. I don't know if you've heard of the famous minister John Henry Jowett. He ministered in England in a bygone century, and a very, very famous, very popular preacher. One time he was putting on a series of messages in the evening for children. And so he started his message, and there were 4 boys who had brought in their penny whistles. And they began tooting different sounds in the middle of the message just to disrupt things. Well, the ushers gathered these 4 little boys up and brought them to Jowett. What measure, how would he discipline them? He looked at the boys and said, boys, your playing was horrible. So I'm going to give you to my wife who will teach you to play, and you can play us a tune in a couple of weeks, which they did in church. Now, I thought that was rather creative discipline. I mean, he could have yelled at them, and what would that have accomplished? But by doing this, he built something positive in their life. We all need to learn discipline. We all need to grow and develop in discipline. And as parents, we need to learn to discipline our children. I don't know if you know who M. Scott Peck is. He wrote The Road Less Traveled. He was writing at one point. Let me read you what he said about this issue of personal discipline. He said, I spent much of my 9th summer on a bicycle. About a mile from our house, the road went down a steep hill and turned sharply at the bottom. Coasting down the hill one morning, I felt a gathering speed to be ecstatic. To give up this ecstasy by applying brakes seemed an absurd self-punishment. So I resolved to simultaneously retain my speed and negotiate the corner. My ecstasy lasted seconds until I was propelled a few dozen feet off the road into the woods. I was badly scratched and bleeding. The front wheel of my new bike was twisted beyond use from its impact upon a tree. I had been unwilling to suffer the pain of giving up my ecstatic speed in the interest of maintaining my balance around the corner. I learned, however, that the loss of balance is ultimately more painful than the giving up required to maintain balance. It is a lesson I have continually had to relearn, as must everyone. For as we negotiate the curves and corners of our lives, we must continually give up parts of ourselves. That's self-discipline. And we need to learn the discipline of giving up parts of ourselves for the sake of the greater good. As parents, it becomes our responsibility to help our children learn that they have to give up some things for a greater good, for a greater gain, the discipline of life. Last week, I began talking about the issues of discipline. The purpose of discipline. You might remember I said it was threefold. The purpose of discipline, first and foremost, is to achieve maturity. It's the responsibility of a parent or mentor or whoever it happens to be. It is to teach the children, the one learning, how to behave properly in every situation. To learn appropriate behavior and what a mature person does in these things. The goal of discipline then, in this rationale, is to set reasonable limits that will protect the child and at the same time help them to act and react in a healthy manner. Additionally, it is a responsibility of discipline to become accountable. Every one of us is accountable to God. Every one of us is going to have to give account of ourselves to God. That's Romans 14:12. And what we need to teach our children is to become accountable for their actions, to learn there are consequences for disobedience, blessings for obedience. And so we need to teach our children how to become accountable. And finally, to learn self-control. Self-control is part of the fruit of the Spirit. And everyone needs to learn how to control their own emotions, their own actions, so that it would be beneficial and proper to God. And so we need to teach our children self-control. Now, how do we do that? We do it through two types of discipline. The first type that I talked about last week is the administration of consequences. And the aim of this is to change the person's will. What you did is bad and you will never want to do this again. Now, understand the two types of discipline I'm talking about are not the way the Bible necessarily distinguishes it. It's my way of categorizing these things. The administration of consequences, what is that? It's giving what they deserve. In the Bible, when it talks about consequences, it talks about scourging. To use a whip And thus, it's the administration of negative consequences because of wrong behavior. And this is a principle that's taught. God does that. Remember when Adam sinned, there were consequences. He died spiritually. He died physically eventually. He was cast out of the garden. And so what we need to teach our children, a loving parent will inflict momentary discomfort so that the child will learn eternal lessons. When do we do it? You might recall, we administer consequences for rebellion, whether it's active rebellion or passive rebellion. It's an issue of the will. Remember, we talked about power games. And at my house, I win all games. Now, I'm not talking about checkers. I'm talking about issues of power. There's one will that will win. I don't care how much they yell, scream, or whatnot. My will is bigger than theirs. And that's the way God is. God wills, God wins. And God disciplines rebellion. Why? Why do we administrate negative consequences? Because positive doesn't always work. God offered positive consequences to Adam. Leave that fruit alone, you'll live forever. And he disobeyed. Do you think positive always works? No, it doesn't. It is only the administration of negative consequences for inappropriate actions that people are going to learn. How do you do it? You administer it in appropriate manner to the circumstances. There is a difference between an accidental event, spilling a glass of milk, and deliberately spilling the milk. The consequences are much more severe, and it should be sufficient to invoke change. It's got to hurt. And I'm not talking necessarily physically. It's got to deal with issues in such a way that they don't want to do it again. It's got to be negative to the point that they said, that I don't like that, therefore I won't do it. That's the administration of consequences. But there's a positive type of discipline. And that positive discipline is the education for training our character. And the aim is self-control again. It's training your children to be godly. And what is that? Larry Richards, in his book on discipline, says, biblical discipline is goal-oriented. It seeks to develop a godly person who is responsible to the Lord and who walks in his way. We just read in Hebrews 12:10, why does God discipline us? For our benefit. And so positive education or training is for developing of character, not just to do the right things, but to do the right things for the right reasons. There's a difference between teaching your children how to make a bed and grounding them for not making their bed. Oh, by the way, I hope you teach your children to make your beds and that they do it. I think that's a good discipline to learn. Why? Because it's just teaching them responsibility, and your bed ought to be made up at least once a day anyway. So why not make them do it? I mean, that's just my viewpoint. What you're doing is not teaching your children that you reap what you sow. Training your child is teaching them to sow so that they can reap. It's training in the positive. When do you do it? When does this type of discipline occur? I have found in my own life it's never stopped. It continues in my life. I'm still in the process. And so as parents, it's a lifelong process, even with our children, helping them to do what's right and good and all those different things. Deuteronomy 6, when it talks about train your children when they sit down, when they rise up, when they go to bed, when they put on their clothes. I mean, all of life is about learning this type of discipline. Every aspect of life. And we never outgrow it. And as parents, all we're doing is serving as the first teachers in the process. Why do we do it? We do it to develop character. We want children. We want people who do things because they want to do them, not because they have to do them. If all you ever teach is that there are going to be consequences of your actions, the person will do it as long as they know they'll be caught. But when they think they can get away with it, they will cease doing it. But if you impact their character so that they want to do it, then it's an issue that lasts a lifetime. Punishment teaches a child not to do it when there's accountability. But positive character is training them to do things right from the heart. And it's not either or. Y'all understand? It's both. We need both positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. We need the administration consequences, and we need the training, the education or training for character as well. Both need to be occurring. Now, what happens, though, is that many people go to extremes in this. And this is where we have to learn the limits of discipline. Let me talk first about the two extremes of discipline. One extreme is the strict parent. Now, I'm going to use other words to try and describe this. Legalistic, rules-oriented, totalitarian. You know what a totalitarian is? My way or the highway. And to some extent, as parents, you have to be that. But I'm talking the extreme here. Everything. There's no give. There's no love. I mean, it's just rules, rules, rules. And parents enforce them, and parents are merely the rule enforcers. But you know what happens when there's totalitarian governance? Just go to look at all these nations that have lived under totalitarianism. All totalitarianism teaches is rebellion. It becomes oppressive. There's no heart. It develops resentment. And so if you are a strict totalitarian parent, you're prepping your kids for rebellion. That's what you're doing. But the other extreme is equally as bad, and that's the passive parent. Other words, libertine, license, or in the word of Judges, every man did that which was right in his own eyes. That is, the parents don't make the rules, the kids make the rules. Just whatever the kids want, that's fine. You know why that's bad? Because the kid begins to think they're the center of the universe and they are not subject to any authority. And therefore, when they get to work and they don't like the things are, they can't submit. They get fired. They lose job after job. They go to school, the teacher says do this, and they don't want to do it, and poof. Again, they never learn to respect authority. And so as a result, when you compare these two, the strict and the passive, both of them are inappropriate for child rearing and for training. Both show a lack of love for the child. Because a true love for the child will want what's best for the child. A strict totalitarian parent only wants best for the parent. Remember what Hebrews 12 says? They did it for the parents did it for their purposes. And the passive parent, they say they're doing it because they love their child. They don't. Because if they truly love their child, they would want what's best for the child. And that's not a libertine lifestyle in any of those. Both of them show a lack of love. I think what we really need is a style of parenting that's called active. Active, that is liberty and love. It's the responsibility of the parents to give limits and teach the child to live within those limits. That's what God does. He says, don't do this, but do this, this, and this. God draws a real broad border around us. And we have the freedom, the liberty to live within the limits. Now, if we get outside the limits, there's discipline, the negative consequences. But within the limits, go and do whatever you want. Let me give you an example. Some of you parents, do you have a rule that you can't eat candy right before a meal? Anybody have that rule? Why? Isn't candy good? I like candy. Kids should eat candy whenever they want, especially just before bed. No. Why do you have those rules? Well, you don't want them interfering with their appetite for supper where they eat a balanced meal. You don't want to eat just before bedtime because it may give them a sugar rush and then they'd be up all night, that sort of thing, and you'd be up all night. But does that mean no candy ever? Aren't there periods of time that they can? And so you can have candy, but within limits. That's the sort of thing that we're talking about. The freedom to operate within limits. Now, I want to give you some examples of discipline from my own experience, my own learning, and my own failures. Some of these I learned by doing the wrong things. Others I learned from the wisdom of others and applied them to my life. First, let's start with some do's of discipline. These are things you ought to incorporate in your discipline as a parent or even as a spiritual mentor. First and foremost is this. Do be a model of the behavior you want your child to have. I read the story of a man who walked in on his son, and the son was just mouthing off to mom something awful. He grabbed the boy without a second thought and just spanked his pants something good. And he looked at the boy and said, "Where did you learn that sort of behavior?" And the boy with tears looked in his eyes to his dad and says, "From you, Dad, from you." The dad vocally and verbally abused the mother. And the boy was just imitating his father in mouthing off to the mother. You need to be an example of what you want your child to do. And if you make rules for your child, you better do the same thing. If that means no eating candy just before supper, let them see you not eating candy before supper. Sneak into the bathroom to eat it. You get my drift? You get my drift? Be an example of what you want your child to be. Of course, that's my entire philosophy of parenting. Become what you want your child to be, and by and large, they will be. Second rule. Do teach the expectations of your child in a language that they can understand. If you have a rule, you explain the rule at their level. Howard Hendricks always says, put the cookies on the shelf so that they can reach them. And so make sure they understand them. This is what I did. I always, after making a rule or giving a command, I know those sound bad, but we do that. I had them repeat and tell me what I just said. Okay, what did I just say? And if they can't repeat it, understandably, it means I didn't communicate. So I would explain again until they explained it in terms that they understood. They need to know what the expectations are. Otherwise, to discipline them when they don't know the expectation is unfair to them. Third, do involve both parents in discipline. One of the worst, did you catch this? One of the worst things that could ever be said is, Wait until your dad gets home. Moms! No! Discipline is best served hot. When it happens. Dad is not the bad guy who wears the black hat. Should dad discipline? Oh, absolutely. Should he support mom when he gets home? Absolutely. But moms, you are just as responsible to discipline as dad. And dad, you do not abdicate to mom. You both need to be involved and both be committed to the same thing. Fourth, this relates. Do ensure consistency in discipline. You know what I learned about kids raising 3? They are manipulative. If they want something, they'll go to mom and say, Mom, can I do this? Mom say, no. So mom goes out of the room, so they go to dad and say, Dad, can I do this? My kids did that once. Once. And when I find out they have just played mom against dad, there is a time of education. We don't do that. Mom and dad, you have to agree on things. And if one makes a decision and gives that decision before you, y'all talk about it. And can you change your mind? Yeah, but it has to be both of you. Both of you have to agree. And if you change your mind, then you can tell the children, we changed our mind. That sort of thing. Now, there's another part of this that I find real hard to apply to my life. It applies to grandparents as well. Oh, grandparents get to bend the rules. Because we're grandparents. The truth of the matter is, the parents have the right. And it is our responsibility to follow the rules of the parents, not our own rules. Fifth, do discipline issues the will. When will is involved, you have to deal with it. If you don't deal with it, the children will not learn to submit to authority. They will disrespect authority. You're teaching them rebellion. So when it's active issues of the will, deal with it. Now, I don't know what the right way of dealing with it in every situation. You understand? But you've got to deal with it. And they've got to see that their will doesn't win at all times. Now, if they happen to be right, that's okay. But if they're wrong or it's your decision, you win. Sixth thing. Do what you say. One of the greatest faults, if not the greatest, I see in parents is threatening their child and never do it. You do that and I'm going to... So the kid does it and the parent says, you do that again and I will... They do it again and the parent says, you do that again and I will... You know what you've taught? Your word doesn't mean a thing and you're not about to follow through. If you say you're going to do it, you do it. That's one of my standard rules at my house with my kids growing up. If I said this is the consequence and they violated it, they got the consequence. Period. I didn't violate that rule. And my kids learned that if I said it, I meant it. By the way, that's what God does. He says in His Word, I'm going to do this. He doesn't back down. And when we teach our children that we violate our word, we're teaching them that God violates His. Don't threaten your children with an action unless you intend to follow through with it. And if they violate it, you fulfill your word or they'll back into corner every time. I've seen it too many times. 7, be simple in your rule making. Keep them few And don't put 18 different stipulations into every one. One, the kid would understand it, and second, I wouldn't either. Keep them simple. Keep the rules few and simple. 8, do extend your love and forgiveness. Are your kids going to mess up? Nod your heads this way. And when they do, let them experience the consequence, but in the same time, show them love and forgiveness at all times. And finally, and I could come up with more, but I thought this was enough dues. Do be age appropriate. There are ages when it's appropriate, I believe, to spank a child. But I think when they hit teenage years, I don't think you spank them anymore. One, they become bigger than you, they might beat you up. Secondly, you've got to hit them where it hurts. And as they get bigger, you could swat them all you want, probably couldn't touch their feelings. So you got to touch them in other areas. And so that's where you learn to be smarter than your kids. I hope you're smarter than your kids. Be age appropriate with your discipline. Here's some don'ts. Don't do this. Don't administer consequences before the child is old enough to understand. Babies don't understand rules and regulations. You know what shaken baby syndrome is? It's where a parent becomes frustrated with a child who's crying, can't make it stop, so they take the baby and they shake it like this. Do you know what happens when that occurs? Now, I'm not going to use medically specific terms. I'm going to use terms that convey meaning. A baby's brain floats. And when you shake it, it starts bouncing off the walls. You bruise the brain. That's horrible. The problem is not with the baby, it's with the parent. The baby only knows how to cry. And therefore, you should never shake a baby. You could kill it or render it brain damage for life. Never shake a baby. Secondly, and this is related, do not use excessive physical discipline. You're not trying to break an arm, bruise, or give a black eye. What you're trying to do is cause a child to experience enough discomfort that they don't want to do it again. When our children were little, we used a plastic spatula, and we would spank them with their clothes on, and it would sting like fire, and they would go, "Hoo!" and they didn't like it. That was the entire purpose of it. And we spanked them till they cried, and when they started crying, we stopped. Of course, then they learned, if I start crying immediately. So you got to balance that, you understand? But we didn't bruise, you don't break, you don't hit. You understand? Excessive physical force is inappropriate. That's abuse. Third, do not discipline your child in anger. And every parent has violated this at some point. They start yelling and screaming. Maybe they use excessive discipline. I don't know. But the moment you lose control, the kids won. Did you catch that? If you are angry, this is one of the times to violate one of my rules, which says discipline is best served hot. At that point, discipline is best served cold. Wait till you calm down so you can control your voice, control your actions, and be appropriate. Never, never discipline your child in anger. Wait till you settle the issue in your own heart. Fourth thing, don't threaten and not fulfill. And you say what? Oh, you said that already. I'm going to say it again. Why? Because it's probably one of the chief things that I see parents violating. And so I put it in the positive, always do what you say, and then never don't do what you say you're going to do. Understand, we are conveying the image of God to our children, and when we fail to do what we say, we're teaching them that God's not going to do what He said. Fifth, don't deny your child the essentials of life. Food, bathroom facilities. Now understand, if your child's sitting there and doesn't want to eat the meatloaf and starts bad-mouthing, is it okay to send them to bed without supper? Absolutely. But don't starve the child. Sometimes skipping a meal might be good for them. Then Proverbs kicks in and says, even a hungry man finds bitter plants good. And so maybe they'll eat the meatloaf then, if they get hungry enough. But don't starve your child. Don't deny them the privileges of life and living. That's abuse again. And finally, one other don't. Don't humiliate your child. Don't embarrass them. In the sense of, let me give you an example. Suppose your child was a bedwetter. What's appropriate, what's inappropriate? One of the inappropriate things a parent could do is saying, if you don't do this, I'm going to tell your friends that you're a bedwetter. That's humiliating your child. That's inappropriate. What's appropriate? Having the child strip their bed and take it to the washroom or wash there. That would be appropriate. Don't humiliate, but instead encourage your child. Well, how's my life going to be different? The principles that I've given are to help us to become better disciplinarians in administrating consequences and training our children in terms of character. The principle we aim for is this in all discipline, is to convey love and forgiveness to our children. Because isn't that what God does for us? He loves us and forgives us. So here are some things I think that ultimately we need to do in this regard. First, we should teach our children to ask for forgiveness. One of the faults I see in many parents is they teach their children to say, I'm sorry. You know what sorry is? It means I regret being caught. Forgiveness deals with relationship. It admits wrong and wants to restore, and it recognizes the other person's rights as valid. And so we need to teach our children to say, will you forgive me, mother? Will you forgive me, father? Will you forgive me, brother, sister, aunt, uncle, cousin, friend? To ask for forgiveness. And then second, we need to teach our children to forgive. Why? Because it is not an option in the Christian life. What did Jesus say? Someone sins against you and asks forgiveness 490 times. What do? You forgive. Why? How many times have we sinned against Him? Do you think it might be more than 490? Oh, by the way, I'll give you a hint. I am afraid that many parents are not teaching their children how to forgive because they're walking around angry, bitter, and unforgiving. And so they're giving them an example of unforgiveness. God says forgive. It's your responsibility to forgive. We need to teach our children to forgive. And if they refuse to forgive, then that's rebellion of the will. And therefore, you do things to exercise their will and change their will. Teach your children to ask for forgiveness. Teach your children to forgive. And teach your children that discipline is for their benefit. You remember what Hebrews 12:10 said? God does it for our benefit. And we need to teach our children that the rules and regulations that we have are for helping them to mature, grow stronger, to become more mature. They may not agree with us, but we need to be teaching them that it's for their benefit. And finally, one last thing. Your child needs your love more than anything else. God loved us so much that He disciplines us. And if you do not discipline your child and discipline them with love, they will not know that they're loved. If you allow them to do whatever they want, that's not love. That's not love. And if you abuse them for your own benefit, that's not love. But to train a child to be mature and have character is to express the greatest love that you could have for them. Our God loved us so much, He disciplines us for our benefit. And that's the example we should follow as well. Would you join me in prayer?